let me introduce you and let me introduce our pisciners as well. So you are in front of a group of very brave young learning and knowledge-seeking souls who signed up to try out to see if the pretty innovative educational model that we have at 42 works for them, and if they're fun and it's a good fit for them. So they stay with us for 1 month, fairly intense 4 weeks, where right now we moved everything online, of course, because of the pandemic. We have about 140 fellas who stay with us for 4 weeks. The first week is where we are in now. So they started on Tuesday. They're still, finding their ground and finding their groove and finding their community amongst each other. And after the first week, there's 3 weeks of pretty hardcore coding. So if you get accepted to our program, you have the chance to become the next generation software engineer for Europe. And we thought it would be interesting to get some perspectives from you, because you love technology, but I don't think you consider yourself a technologist necessarily.
No, not necessarily.
3D and virtual reality products and make beautiful things out of them, right? You create art, you're a virtual reality artist, and in that you create worlds, which seems to be, an ultimate profession. So I hope through the conversation we will learn a bit about your motivation, about how you see designing, coding, and developing for this new world works for you. And we decided actually to script as little as possible for the conversation, guys, on the pisciner side. So we have a pretty free floating exchange, and we will also see that we have at least 15 minutes in the end, so you can ask the questions that you think we should have discussed, or that you just wanted to get out and hear Jakob's perspective on. So about Jakob, we met, Jakob, it was 2018, I believe, right? For a conference here in Berlin in Germany that I helped co-organize for Google and the World Frontier Foundation. And that was exactly at the intersection between art, politics, and technology. And it was about digital identities and how we form our identities, what architectures might be useful and necessary. And Jakob was part of a session where a really incredible fellow, Hans-Ulrich Obrist, one of the famous art curators of our days, moderated a conversation with contemporary artists about these topics. And as you will find out or already get a taste from, Jakob is a really nice fellow, so we became friends. And a year later, we visited him, my family and I, him and his girlfriend in southern France, where the smart fellow got a scholarship or an artist in residence set up. And I think you're still going back and forward to all sometime, right? So the artist life is a beautiful one if it works out. And Jakob is an example for that. And we have stayed in touch ever since. I really think that his art is both beautiful and pioneering, and always challenging what is possible with technology and especially virtual reality. It's not just me who thinks that. He has quite a track record. I don't know if that's okay to share. Jakob, how old are you?
34.
Yeah, so bloody young, and a track record that is quite impressive, from the Venice Biennale to the Serpentine Gallery, where he got an award from the Google Arts and Culture program, to South by Southwest and many more. he has been exhibiting his work. The Economist says things like the Danish artist is finding new audiences thanks to unlikely collaborations, for example, with the South Korean boy band. That sounds pretty wild, Jakob.
Yeah.
Maybe you want to share a bit about that. And yeah, more generally, I could go on and on, but why don't you say a couple of words about yourself so people really know who you are and not who I think I know.
Yes, of course. Thank you for the introduction, and it's nice to meet everybody. Hello. I mean, I am a, I'm a trained artist traditionally, but been working with, in the beginning, video game technology, and now it's evolving more and more to really we build our own software as well and our own tools, infrastructures for collaboration. Like we have a cloud system. I have in the cloud we're hosting like a virtual world we're working on now, and there's people in the States, in Belgium, in Denmark, and Germany, all working together on a big virtual landscape from different disciplines. There are 2 poets on this new project. There's a famous like musician and performer. There's a museum of natural history. There's a nightclub involved, an art foundation. And what I've really been trying to explore, I'm learning, especially during COVID the past year, I've become more self-aware. And the thing that's really key is perhaps the relationship between your something like really intuitive and imaginative in you as a human. It's very sensory, very personal to you, and how that relates to larger infrastructures and how you can weave them together. Because when you work with technology, it's at a certain scale, you will hit an obstacle called scale, a question of scale. And it means like it's very hard to make a pure solo project when you work with technology, for example. But when you think as an artist, you kind of come from the mentality. You're trained to think you are the artist, you're the individual. It's kind of up to you to create something. But once you really dive deep into technology and you want to reach a certain depth, you hit a space where you need to connect with other people. It's like, for me, for example, it began with that I realized, okay, I'm building large virtual landscapes, but then my sound could use some more work. I'm not really a trained sound artist. So then I started working with a composer in the state, Michael Riesman, who then started making music for the piece. Then I started working with narrators, and then slowly my project started to evolve and involve many different disciplines, because I think the main thing that we really need to protect in the future with something like virtual reality, with AR, all the time we spend on screens, is a really strong human element. So a way of thinking that's not really about technology at all. Like you need to remember what it means to be human in many other ways, to be close to people, to sense them, to give hugs, to ask yourself what your values are, what's important to you, how do you live. And all this boils down to like 100 different decisions that all of a sudden you end up doing as an artist, working with technology and a team. It's like, I mean, as you know too, probably from Google, it's like you work with a lot of people that are all interconnected. And usually in our culture, more and more, either that is driven by, by profit or one specific mission. It's like top down. More and more technology is controlled by an LLC, like a company, a profitable company that has like one aim, and everything from the direction kind of boils down, filters downwards to everything. But I believe we're really, more spiritual beings, and we need to connect more unilateral. But then once you do it,
So
yeah.
Jakob, I'll jump in and intersect a little bit just to make it a bit of a ping pong, right? And to
Yes.
trigger some thoughts. You said so many things that I'd love to claw into. But one aspect I know is at the center of what you're developing, and that is the notion of creating a world and then having individual perspectives in that world, right? That is really one of the fundamental changes, I would argue, with virtual reality. That almost like in an open world scenario that we know from computer games, people are looking at stuff in their own way and exploring the space frankly, much more extensively than you would on a 2D painting, even if it was a big painting. And so how is it possible to embrace that subjective, emotional, intuitive human dimension that is on the one hand enabled by the technology, but on the other hand also constrained and really limited by the technologies that you live? And that thought that you developed about that you just barely touched on with making the technology invisible, it's again this duality is very present in virtual reality. I feel at the one hand, it's very immersive and you're really somewhere else. At the other hand, you have this clunky thing on your head, and it's very, very present that you have an interface, right? How do you let the interface disappear and then you create real magic?
Right. Yeah, there are kind of two, let's say, design concepts, pillars that I build most of my projects around. One is like an intuitive design. So today on like a phone or Zoom or games or something, or even your email, this is a means of interaction that we use as humans, but they're built around a type of interface that's sort of like rational in the sense that here's an icon, you click, you engage, you get a feedback. And this is kind of a rational design. It's like see, hear, touch, movement, something happens. And then you have this energy rolling between you and the system, constantly moving and clicking. But I'm much more interested in designs where me as an artist and with my collaborators, we do a lot of that work in the virtual world. So there can be like triggers, effects, things that connect to your body, or even like your breathing I worked with before, your eyes, your hand movements, your speed of movement can connect to the world. Things that have a lot of that is never sort of one-to-one interaction, but that is intuitive. So as you're moving in virtual reality, like you look in one direction, things over there might change, and then when you turn around, the system will know you turn around and something has changed behind you. And as you kind of move off, in a lot of my work, I play with the speed of time and your movement. So sound, our ears can hear a certain sound spectrum, but when you slow down sound, you change the tone, and you can all of a sudden hear species you normally can't hear. You can hear complexities in sound and environments. So I work a lot with connecting like scale and sound to your movement. And that's been a pillar that all my projects have really been based around. And I think this has been a big part actually of my, also like professionally and getting shows and everything. It's like I choose at a point about like 6 years ago to focus on intuitive design and focus on like an extreme sense of depth in a medium that's often characterized by surface. So what that means is that we have so much technology, we have so many tools, so much available, anything, like you can almost create anything you can imagine. And you can create an infinite amount also of connections between the virtual and something physical. You can send signals back and forth. But in the infinite, I think what makes things stand out is a sense of depth in a single thing. So that's another pillar that I really focused on, because like 6 years ago, there were a lot of artists starting to do a lot of virtual art and doing lots of like collage style things. I'm trying to get some light on me. I don't know what happened. A cloud outside.
Yeah, that's it.
I'm in natural lighting. So like a lot of artists start doing this collage style. So where you mix existing things together. And I choose to do the opposite, of go like the route of extreme craft. So all my projects are based on like me spending months in a location with collaborators, collecting sound, 3D scanning, and finding like a sense of depth in a medium characterized by, lots of surface. So that's kind of one thing that really resonated with me. And then I kind of found these pillars, and then each project I've done for the past 6 years, I introduce one new variable. So instead of doing one project that tries to do everything from the beginning, I've been building, we have like quite a big infrastructure now in my studio, but it's taking like, many years to build out. Yeah. And I've done it by just saying each project I do one new thing and then I add to it in terms of the technology, rather than doing everything at once.
Very cool. Let's get to that, hands-on part, because I think that's really interesting for our community as well. But I have to throw one, I guess, thesis at you that Thomas Bornheim, a good friend of mine and leader of the 42 school in Heilbronn, and I are kind of in constant battle about. As you might remember from our earlier conversations, I was part of a group of friends that set up the Google Cardboard when it first came out. And you know, one of my friends in particular was leading that group, and we were just constantly talking about it. And one of the terms, one of the beliefs that this community held was that we're stuck with a square fetish, with a screen fetish in the moment, right? Like everything is boiled down a lot into these smartphones, you know, these little slabs of glass that you put in your hand. And even our movies, you know, we watch in these very fixed environments. And I always thought that this idea of a screen fetish, something that, you know, future generations will look at and say, wow, for 50 years, they really thought, you know, this is the way to interact with media and how to have, you know, remote meetings and things like that. Do you think that, you know, slowly but surely VR and AR will become the dominant way to look at things, and, you know, you can turn around and you really feel that you're in a space? Or what's your perspective on this?
Yeah, something else I've been kind of building my work around is also not being tied to a medium. So instead, what I've really built all my thinking, it's like the thinking and really kind of what matters in a way. And the thinking that changed is a new like approach to to spatiality. And I think this is what's really changing. So we used to think about the virtual as like two-dimensional screens and this like direct input into action. But you know, when you think about it as humans, this is very it's like it's not very human to sit I'm like kind of like bent over a little screen right now. It's actually more embodied to walk around in space, even though you have a headset on or whatever. It actually makes it in a way less technological because it makes you more organic. So what I think is characteristic of all these things that we see in VR, in AR, in what's called like virtual production now, and like how cinema is starting to using virtual tools, is a new approach to spatiality and technology. So technology really doesn't have to be on a screen at all. It can be a lot of other things. And there are many practitioners exploring this in many different ways. Like, yeah, you have like VR, you have AR, but something I'm also doing now is building like big spatial sound systems. So I'm thinking a lot about, it's like we build a virtual environment. There's a full landscape, but then we can map that environment now onto architecture and fill the invisible space in the architecture between the walls with the virtual sound.
Wow.
And spatialize that. So now we've connected my own sound system to the game engine so they can track movement and sound. So it's a lot about using the space between the screens. This is the space we actually live in. There are particles in the air in front of our eyes. There's like cold air on my skin, you know, there's all this space between. And I think this is the big change that's happening. It's to think about the virtual as a three-dimensional space, not just as a three-dimensional space on a screen, but as a three-dimensional space that can connect to us, to make us more human again.
I really big thank you. I hope you PCners see where this is going, right? We want to get you away from just writing code for a computer. With the skills that you can learn in our program, that you will learn in the program, you can really build worlds and explore completely new things that, you know, we're not even thinking about right now. I remember one friend built this thing that shoots little air vortex at you, right? And so you get a physical feedback when you're playing air tennis and things like that. So, Jakob, we want to get to the part where we hear questions from the students. So the second bit that I'd like to explore a little bit with you is the question of, you know, how do you work with software engineers and technologists, and how do you think about setting up collaborations? You're more than welcome to throw in some examples also from other companies or teams. I don't know. I know, for example, Team Labs is one of those groups that just produces amazing work, and there are more than 100 people, right? What is your perspective on collaboration and technology development in particular? And now, because I tend to overload my questions, I'm going to throw one more at you just so you can meander and also bring in different views. We have a virtual reality and augmented reality lab here in the school. And of course, my question, and I guess the question that a bunch of the students have is, how do we get started? You know, what would you recommend as nice beginner projects, group projects? You know, is it to meet up in the evening, drink a beer or 5 and just experience VR and then get into creating? What's your recommendation on that scale?
Yeah, a lot of questions in one that I'll try to connect, and perhaps in a few different steps. Like one is, you know, creativity and scale. So you have Team Lab, there are 100 people. I'm building my studio now, and we are probably like 10 people working, and I think maybe we'll arrive at 10, probably not more than, you know, like 15 or something. Because there's something about the bigger you go, the more you need to produce, the more you need to like have this kind of top-down direction, the more people are kind of outsourced and so on. So there's something about what is your personality, what do you think is important, and what space do you like to kind of, or would you see yourself as kind of existing in as an artist, if it's like in games and art and cinema and so on. But I think those questions come later. I think these are ones you've explored a bit, how your personality and skill fits. And then also the context you're working in, just like the pure professional context that you're in. You know, what's the current innovation, what's happening? Like right now, there's a lot of sound innovation, you know, so a lot of new sound tools are being developed, a lot of new virtual production. But I think it's like, I mean, literally right when the new VR wave came around, it's like in New York in 2015, there were a lot of meetups, and they were actually, these meetups, a lot of the people that met are a lot of the people who've established many different types of big studios now from these meetups. And the meetups were, one was like experience. So experiencing and sharing like many types of experiences. There are the more commercial ones on like, you know, like VR app stores and games. And then there are little, there's actually pretty big, super experimental art community in the digital art community internationally. Lots of like online shows going on, really niche things. So one is like experience in a broad range of things, and not necessarily just looking for what you think is good, but finding things within things. Like you can experience like a horrible VR work, but maybe it's doing a super unique thing with the way the sun moves that you never thought about, and you take that sun. You know, it's like it's a new medium, so you pick and grab everywhere. I pick and grab a lot from actually literature and video games in my craft. Like I find a lot of inspiration like this. So that's kind of the second thing.
You have a good excuse to play a lot of video games. That's really what you're saying.
I used to. I don't really do so much anymore, but I follow it because these are masters of spatial craft in 3D, and it's not to be neglected. They've been doing it for decades. A lot of us are new to it. So there's a lot to learn. And the craft is there. So that brings me to how to collaborate. You know, on my team, because of that, I have one guy who is like a video game developer. So he's educated, very traditional video game development, and he's a producer for a video game studio part-time, and then he's with me part-time. But then I also have like a pure sound artist who's just a complete nerd about kind of ASMR nature texture sounds. You know, and I protect his space of creativity by having another guy who's purely like now, he handles everything in the game engine, and he knows where everybody's working, and that's his job. And because I have him and he likes that type, like it's his personality to do that, it means that the sound artist doesn't have to think about it. He can just make sound art. And then it's like, I can kind of more do the conceptual part and build the virtual landscapes. So something that's important to explore early on is try like many different things, and then perhaps like select one that you spent like 6 months on or something, going in depth with, so that you learn what it means to also execute and explore things in their detail, because everything looks fascinating from the surface, the immediate surface, but once you dig into it, you hit a lot of complications along the way. So that's kind of my approach. That's my personality. That's what I believe in. How you can find your own path in this with technology. It's like explore many things, meet many people working with things kind of openly, then perhaps make a little list of things you find interesting, look at those, and then do like an experiment that's quite deep in a single thing. And then once you do that, then you'll be meeting other people who might have another interest. Like if you really love just coding, but another person loves more like seeing a bigger project come together, then maybe this is kind of a good fit together to explore something, and kind of see it come together. It's really important to be able to do this. Otherwise, at some point, in some years, it can be really hard if you keep everything to yourself. It needs to be kind of open and communicative.
Yourself, it's also hard to, I imagine, to orchestrate a lot of individuals who want to contribute, their individual aspect. And you described, the old, it's almost the patriarchic view of the artist, right? You as the composer, and you basically rule over all these minions who produce things for you. And what you just described sounded much more collaborative, like a collective of individuals or producing something together. So I imagine there is a lot of soft skills, people skills.
Or it's like you have a slider. So you can kind of have a slider of anarchy, because there are some people in studios that work intentionally. Like I know a studio, it's called AAA Collective in Berlin, and there are like 7 people, and they simultaneously build levels together in a game that they published. And that is like their way. My way is sort of, I spend years thinking about a kind of world, a concept, and then I kind of build out some world and concept. Like right now I'm working on the history of swamps and making a virtual swamp around Berlin. And then I invite all the artists to enter that swamp, but I still kind of first conceptualize the swamp. But I know that they have an interest in the swamp, and they can be themselves as artists. Like there are poetic readings inside of the swamp, for example. There's going to be a singer singing to the swamp. So they're themselves in my world. But there's kind of a slider that is a lot about personality, ideology. Like there's so much thinking outside of just programming that circles back and have a major influence actually exactly on what you program, how you program, and with who you do it. There's a bit of back and forth.
Just to come back to the very hands-on part, because that's something that we might be able to pick and run with, and then hopefully you'll be maybe not impressed, but at least happy that we were able to implement some of your recommendations. You mentioned the meetups, and I think that's exactly the way that we think about this as well, right? There is a space, there is some technology, and we will invite the students to go there and breathe life into it. Now, is there particular tools that you can recommend, or where you say, look, this is great, but don't start with that. You should first do something a little bit more simple. Like we have a Fab Lab as well, right? And the MakerBot is kind of, you can't really break it. Well, you break it, but you repair it all the time, and it's good to get started, right? We also have a Formlabs printer that's a bit more expensive, and we'd recommend you to first start with the other ones. Things like that, a software that you think is great in the beginning, something that I know you're using the Unreal game engine a lot, right?
Yeah.
So that's probably state of the art. I don't know if it's better to start with that immediately, or what's your thinking?
I believe in erratic behavior, to be honest. But it's like erratic is something, it's basically a rock that moved from the Ice Age to a completely random location through like 10,000 years, but you can trace the path back.
Yeah.
That's a logical path. So I think it's important first to maybe like do quickly, and I do this for every project and every new hire I do also. We quickly explore many areas, kind of rapid fire. So that means like maybe you download Unreal, you look around in it. Is it interesting? Why is it interesting? Maybe you know a friend who uses Unity, and you go to a weekend jam session where they use Unity, and then you start using Unity. Maybe you like it, maybe you don't. Maybe you want to use like 3D printing software. These are tools, and I think it's important early to very openly do some rapid exploration of them, so you figure out like, okay, this is really boring to me, or this is really exciting. I mean, for me, a big trigger was one of the first 3D scanners. Went to art school in London in 2012 or 13, and they had just gotten a new 3D scanner, and I normally it was really expensive to use. I couldn't really afford it, but I met the technician, and I said I'd like to scan animals. So he found hours every week, and I would bring him animals to scan. So I would bike down on the harbor and get like a deep sea crab bought from a fisherman and like scan it. And this just like really captured my mind, where before I met that guy and I just randomly went to see, I don't know, what is this 3D scanner thing? I was doing like a lot of these like virtual landscapes and paintings of them, but by that encounter, it's become hugely influential on my thinking about materiality, organisms in the virtual. It really manifested itself for me. But it was kind of like an erratic behavior. I was just going to this meetup in the scanner. But another friend of mine was just, wow, that's really boring, Jacob. This is not interesting to me. So I think it's important to do like quick prototyping without getting stuck in the details. And this is a principle you can, utilize on all levels. In the beginning, as you start creating go to a course, and then once you do a project, you can do the same. You want to do a project about sound in space. Well, you have these 3 ideas. You go through 3 of them super quick, and then you find one, and then you have a conversation with someone else, and then you go to the next level. And you always do this because the one thing with code is that it's an infinite rabbit hole.
That's
and you don't want to get stuck in it immediately, unless it's your thing. That's also the thing, there are artists who are like just the most amazing programmers. I'm not one of them. I'm like decent programming. I'm not, but there are people who are too. So I don't want to, seal that
it's like
off
playing
either.
an instrument. I was playing around with a MIT processing art language. I don't know if you came across that. It's really funny. You're creating all kinds of geometries, and I'm with you. The fellow that we like a lot, Mitch Resnick from the MIT Media Lab, has this nice saying: technology should be like finger paint. So you basically just get your hands dirty and you start to create, right? Pisciners, if you remember in that Bloom's taxonomy of, the different levels of understanding and building a competence, of course, creation is actually the highest one, but you can also turn it upside down and start by creating without understanding, right?
Yes.
And more that exploration, that playfulness mode that you'll see in children and good artists.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this is really good. I feel I took almost too much time because there is already a bunch of students and someone from the team as well who have some questions. So let's open it up. And Lotte, you're actually first on my list. So why don't you kick it off?
Okay, sure. You mentioned that you get a lot of inspiration from video games as well. Do you have any specific games that, especially last year or the year before, that really inspired you?
Yes, I mean, I like the Hideo Kojima's Death Stranding. I like that game. I like these like sensory scenes in it. I thought that was really exciting. But the one game that really impacted me was this Fallout 1 from like 1999, because it was like based on an alternative history trajectory of what happened after the Second World War, and then they did this riff referring back to like post Second World War aesthetics in a future. And I played this as a kid, a teenager, and it's kind of how I think. Yeah, but I like Death Stranding a lot. I thought that was super cool. Very, very interesting. I was very happy that something like that has come into existence in this world. I think it's the first signal we see of a change in the game industry's mentality towards, a kind of like art, culture, and exploration. It's still kind of stuck in being a game on so many conventions of this like more like trigger descriptive design, more like a traditional game design rather than this like intuitive. But I think it's a signal that we're about to enter a new world of possibilities that it's basically up to us to create something different. Like that's really what it is.
Very cool. Carlos, please come in.
So hi, first of all, I just looked at all of your art. It's really great. It has like this sort of magical realism, sort of. You can tell it's like realism, but it's slightly not. And I find that very, very cool and inspiring. And I have like a question: in an ideal world, what would be your end goal? To remove like the medium of art completely? Like you look at a painting, you look at a painting and consume the art, what you feel, or you read a book. But in your art, you try to remove the boundaries by literally being there with a goggle. So is your end goal to have no medium at all and just creating a real world, a real?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, you know, my favorite art form is literature. And it's a good example because it's sort of, there's a single person imagining something, they write it down, you read it, it enters your brain. It's almost like telekinesis. And this is how I think personally, you know, or like I go to a landscape, spend a long time there, you spend a long enough time, you start seeing responses and imagining your perspective on things differently than how you did before. So this is kind of like a mental construct. So I think to me, this is the really exciting thing. It's almost like hallucinating or sharing imaginations, being kind of like in a different flow with an environment and people through the technology as a medium. So this is how I think. I am not like, again, like Max said before, thinking that, for example, like VR will replace painting. I love painting. I paint a lot too, you know. And I need to paint to actually create my worlds. I need to do a painting of colors and sketches before I can build it. So that's kind of how I think about it. I think about it as like mental, emotional constructs that can be shared and distributed and made by people together. That's what I tell myself. Why am I doing this?
Okay, thank you very much.
Nice one. I just hold back and not co-comment on stuff. Spyros, please ask your question, and others, please think about stuff you'd like to contribute or ask. So I think we have time for a couple more questions. Thanks.
Hi. Is there a project until now that you are proud of? And what is the real motivation? From where you observe motivation? Where is your personal resources? What drives your motivation? Thank you.
I love that question. What drives me, I think, for my personality is curiosity to formations and natural histories that we normally don't think about and rarely represent in a virtual space. So the artwork that I'm most proud of is called Reanimated. It's on my website. It's about an extinct bird. And it's based on an interview I did with an ornithologist who spent 40 years of his life studying a bird that's now extinct. So he told me about his emotions and memories of this. And then I created an entire project over 2 years about this that I've actually we've shown this to more than 100,000 people and in like 70 different venues by now. And again, that's kind of like this transfer of a memory of an emotion by someone about a landscape that somehow through VR is, you know, distributed to people. So to me, it's natural histories and representing things in the world outside that perhaps we are getting quite far away from if we only design technology from the computer first. So all my inspiration never starts in the computer, never. It always starts in a conversation with an artist, a poet, a biologist or something, or a landscape. And then it starts entering the computer. So that's my personal motivation.
Thank you.
Beautiful. Now I do say, Jakob, that we think a lot about, you know, the motivation to learn and to, you know, set learning goals and, you know, how do you set up your pace? How do you set up your habits? so that you are productive, right? That's kind of the nut that the students are trying to crack, because we don't have professors, right? There is no schedule. That you're self-responsible for what you do, and that's why I thought it would be nice to bring you in, because you're a master of that, right? Nobody tells you what piece of art to do next, why you want to get up in the morning. So thanks. That was already a really nice insight into your practice.
Yeah, I think I mentioned a book for you before called Psycho Magic by Jodorowsky. Alejandro Jodorowsky is one of my big heroes. And it's all about setting up rituals. What that translates to are habits, action spaces, things that you do, that you set up, and within that something can happen that is important to you. And that is how I want to build my studio moving forward, is to be able to do that more. So I build a world, a context that other people explore, or I block off like 5 days when no one is allowed to interrupt me. And these are the 5 days where I like build a major component in the virtual world. And then I do emails, planning all this stuff for a week or even 2 weeks. And then I go to a landscape for 3 days, no interruption, and then back. And this is necessary. Without doing this, I'm not able to make this like really visceral effect in my projects. So you can kind of set a rhythm, boxes, but the habits.
Jakob, for reminding me. Jakob, actually, I'd asked him to think about some recommendations for our library. You probably heard in the session earlier about the Markthalle, right? That we're planning a library for happy software engineers. So we're really looking for books that help you not just to be good in your craft, but to be happy while you do it. And now I saw that earlier today, Jakob actually contributed a pretty significant list of books. Usually I would have spent more time on this, but maybe you want to give us a quick pitch or some information about the ones that you have put together here.
Yeah, the most important book to me is called Playing Nature by Linda Chan. This came out 2 years ago. She is a professor at UCLA, and it's really about the representation of nature in virtual space, or the lack of it, or the generic creation of it. And that could be translated to so many other things. I'm interested in landscape, she's interested in landscape, but it could be anything. It could be politics, gender, borders, whatever it is that's important to kind of represent in a virtual space and how to do it. That is my key book right now. And then of course there's this Psycho Magic by Jodorowsky. And then there's a writer, Nora Khan, in the States that is just amazing. She's written a lot of really meaningful things on codes, technology surveillance. I could really recommend looking for her writing. It is phenomenal. It's excellent.
Thank you. That is very, very cool. And then you recommended a couple of websites that you probably browse and read regularly because they keep updating stuff.
Yeah, there are 2 websites. One is gamescenes.org. It's a bit dated. He doesn't, an Italian guy, he doesn't, Matteo, I don't remember his last name, Matteo something. He doesn't update it so much more, but he spent many years, even like 6 years ago, documenting artists making video games, and video games about art. What that translates to is just, virtual art. And he did this for many years. It's kind of like a huge archive. He hasn't updated it so much the past few years. And then Kill Screens is kind of between, they used to review video games, and now they start to do, they're not like super active, but they do really good stuff. They have started to also do features with the thinking of kind of like the game industry, but applied to artists, performers, musicians, creators who are just making virtual creations. Like a lot of these boundaries we used to thinking about is kind of not really valid anymore between the fields, because we are, as a group of creators, very diverse, and that means the diversity of what's actually being made goes quite further than art world, film, games, and so on. So those 2 sites I really like.
Cool. We will definitely get the books so they are available to you when you come to Wolfsburg, we always have to make it attractive for folks to come and actually spend time in the school, because now we're also used to doing things remote, and you don't have to commute and stuff like that. So it's our job, I feel, to make it attractive to come to the spaceship itself. All right, we got 3 more questions lined up. Valentin, please ask your question or make a contribution.
Yes, Jakob, thank you for your insight and perspective, because I'm very passionate about documentary film, and what I really like is to capture a scene and the soul of the scene. And what I heard about your talk is that you also spend a lot of time in one environment, and you try to capture the beauty and put a lot of effort in creating a scene that you want to conserve. And what I understand, what I think it was the question of Carlos too, that it doesn't matter which medium you see this scene, and that you told too that you have servers where you store your art. And for me, it's very beautiful to think of this, that you have created this environment, your art that is stored somewhere and can be accessed in a different generation with different mediums. And because I work in a post-production company, and we have currently one VR project too for one Brazilian director, that we have to refine some titles and graphics. And I was watching the show, and one thing that was distracting me and was making me feel it's not it could be, because it was too much focus on the technology at the moment, on the medium. And if I look at the images that was playing in the it was a short documentary about favelas in Brazil. It's called Under the Skin, and I couldn't see the beauty of the images itself, the places that they were trying to capture. And I think your approach is very beautiful and gives me a good bridge of my passion about documentary filmmaking, and to be able to use it in the VR space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a huge, one of my favorite spaces in VR is the documentary space. I think it's the most innovative one, to be honest. And there's a lot, there's so much interesting things. It's just most of them show at Sundance Film Festival, Tribeca Film Festivals. If you just go through their, especially a few years, it's become a little commercial the past few years, or a little more advertising driven. But if you look just 2016, 17, 18, there's a lot of really amazing stuff. And there's a lot going on in Europe too, France. I know a lot of projects that I can't share, but I know a lot of projects are in the making in this field. And there's quite a growing community of journalists, documentary makers working with VR. And I think it's especially because of this preservation quality of it. Or the New York Times in New York has a whole division focusing on immersive journalism, where they focus on photogrammetry of spaces and go to Syria and different places that are being destroyed. I think that's an amazing space. Yeah, I don't know what else to say.
As you say, to immerse yourself. I remember a New York Times VR piece where you're sitting in a village meeting, I think it was in India or something, and you're kind of fly in the wall at this very intimate environment. And by looking around, it makes it even more compelling. Yeah,
and I think the key thing there too is again, I think a lot in kind of sliders, how far you go in different directions. So for me, it's every texture and sound and story is real, but there's a concept that is normally not visible to you that I make visible to you through the technology. And this, I think, this is my personal opinion. People have very different opinion on it. My personal opinion is that makes it much more stronger. So that means the project about the extinct bird I did, never once do I animate the extinct bird, because it's impossible to revive it. It's gone forever. But you can revive its memories. So I transform the sound, images, textures, and things into something new. And then you kind of go through that. So it's that's based on my belief that I don't want to give the impression that I think we can just revive things virtually, they're lost forever.
Nice.
That's my idea, so that becomes a center for the whole form. I think this makes it much stronger, everything you do in VR, with like documentary material. There's a perspective that is normally not visible to you. You make it visible through the technology.
Yes.
So we have 2 more questions. So let's try to do short questions and like 2-minute answers or so. Johannes, please come in.
Yeah, I'm not sure that this can be done quick, but I'll try. Listening to you talking about art and do this in the context of coding. And to me, coding ultimately is about breaking down things into their smallest components. And it got me thinking, could you define or break down art in some aspects and components? And how many of those aspects of arts can you remove from art and still have a kind of skeleton, bare bone construct that is art?
Great, tough question.
Yeah, 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Sorry about that.
Okay, first of all, I don't really utilize the language of, like, if you work in the animation industry or games, you talk about art and programming. To me, this is not the language I use. All of it is one artwork, all of it, and everybody's creating it together. So I don't do that division. But on a project, actually, right now, for example, I have a lot of people working, but we actually have a document that we share on like Notion, kind of what we use for sharing our progress.
Yeah.
And there's a skeleton of the artwork in its programming that is really distilled to this effect, this concept. We built this way with this programmer in New Zealand. It's like an amazing network programmer that we have to work with someone there. It's super niche type of programming. And he receives the skeleton so that we can create this network of computers locally and in the cloud. And we have this whole network thing going on. And that is like distilled to like an outline, kind of a skeleton of the programming needed. And my philosophy is that when you do that really strong, it allows you much more creativity and freedom, because it means that for all the artists working within that skeleton, they have more freedom to focus on what they do together. I hope that's a useful answer.
It is. Thank you.
Thanks, Jakob. And now we have, last but not least, Pratik Prajapati, who joined our team here in Wolfsburg in the beginning of April. So great, Pratik, that you join and contribute to the session. What's your point and or question?
Yeah, so directly or indirectly, I think my question is already answered, but here it goes. So I followed your art, it's beautiful. And I reminded of a quote by John Lester. He's a filmmaker in Disney, and he quoted that the art challenges the technology and the technology in turn inspires the art. So my question to you is, can you imagine yourself wishing for a technology which can further inspire you to do your art, be it a science fiction or anything which can inspire our fellow students? I hope you got my question.
Yeah. Okay, two short answers probably for me. That's an amazing question. I think one is, the ultimate technology for me is one where, like, I go to a landscape and you get really immersed. You start sensing things you didn't sense before you went there, and it triggers something in you. It's like you get all these images, these emotions, these sensations, and that's technology that's just like grabbing onto that and transferring that to someone else, and then you can share that somewhere else. This is the ultimate technology to me. That's what VR is, without like any budget and timeline and all this stuff. That's the ultimate one for me. But I mean, I work
for this.
Yeah, and the other thing that I work a lot with is, I'm very excited in general about technologies that can extend your senses, so that you can, microphones that can hear things you can't hear. Right now I use a lot of these like macro super zoom lenses, so I can do photogrammetry of things that are like this big in landscapes, so that I can blow them up and show them in new ways to people. So I'm always motivated by the visual and auditory spectrums in a virtual space, but for someone else they could be something very different. that's not about sound or vision in technology. So that's always exciting for me to follow that progress.
True. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Jakob. So someone asked in between in the chat, if your work is different when you are on an island where you are now than when you are in a big city. And I can share the, I hope, open secret that Jakob is setting up a studio, workshop, I guess, in Berlin these days. So the trip to the Danish island is an excursion, as you pointed out. Luckily, not too long excursion, just a couple of hours to get home in a way. But we're very much looking forward to stay in touch, get some advice as we're moving forward. I'm sure I'll bother you with some questions, and maybe one day we can get you down here to Wolfsburg and show you our little spaceship and have a session together where we just hang out and explore some art, explore some technologies. Would be really, really wonderful. And it already was, I think, one of the highlights of this first week in the Piscine. If you look at the chat, the folks are like, wow, inspiring. And, I think it worked what we hoped would happen, right? To go beyond the code and look at what you can create and what that means for people and how you can open up new worlds, new perspectives. I'm certainly a big fan, and I think you found a few more here in the group. Jakob, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. It's really exciting.
Awesome. Thanks, folks. See you all around tomorrow for the kickoff number 2. Get ready, fasten your seatbelts for the coding to start on Monday. See you soon, and thanks again, Jakob. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.